Well, we think that Iran will probably carry out retaliatory measures within the region, somewhere in Iraq, somewhere in Syria, within that general space. While they may use the proxies, there's a likelihood that they're going to want to make it very, very clear that they are the ones who have carried out this type of retaliatory action.
We're expecting to hear from Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, by 1:30 p.m. tomorrow, Beirut local time. Do you think we're going to hear restraint from him as a result of the fact that Lebanon, of course, still doesn't have a government?
Well, I don't know if we're going to hear restraint in the words that they're going to be expressing tomorrow. They may have some slight restraint in their actions. They may delay their types of actions. But I think that we're going to hear some very strong words from Hezbollah, just as we've heard from the Iranians.
Roger, in the lead up to this attack, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo suggested that there was intelligence to suggest that an attack against the United States was imminent. Despite that, though, Congress in the US wasn't notified, and nor were key US allies. Do you think that the United States needs to release the intelligence to further justify the killing of Soleimani and release this to the American public and the wider world?
I think it's always dangerous when you get into speculating on what the intelligence is and whether or not it's good to release it or not. Sometimes the reason you don't release the intelligence is because it can reveal sources and methods. It can reveal ways in which we're still able to track and find information about what the Iranians are doing or other people are planning or plotting. So we're caught in between the politics of the issue and the way in which the U.S. actually collects intelligence. From a political point of view, certainly there's going to be a lot of pressure to release more information about this. From a sources and methods and intelligence collection point of view, there's going to be a desire to keep it as a small a group of individuals who learn more about it as possible.
Roger, let's think about what's going to happen in the medium term. We expect the U.S. ambassador to Iraq to hear in hours from now the official expulsion, basically, of American troops from that country. Where does it leave this government? Because, of course, they've said to me on multiple occasions that they definitely feel as if they have to operate between a rock and a hard place when it comes to trying to balance the Iranian influence with the Americans.
Well,
Could we
I mean,
see another
Iraq
rise of an ISIS-like group as a result of the fact that Americans are going to be leaving a vacuum in the country?
Well, I think when we look at this, if the United States actually does end up leaving Iraq or pulling out of Iraq, and it's not entirely clear that that's guaranteed to happen, the vote was held in such a way that not a lot of the rest of the parliament was there. But if the U.S. does have to pull out, certainly there's room for a vacuum to open up, for ISIS to be able to reassert itself in some ways. Iran would certainly want to block against that. It may start to create greater challenges, for example, for Russia and Turkey in Syria, if ISIS is able to start expanding both in Iraq and re-strengthening their operations in the rest of the region. And we've seen the U.S. also have to take an ease on its ISIS fight right now, at least in the very near term, as it prepares for the Iranian response.
Well, you kind of just answered the next question there when it comes to who fills that vacuum. Is it a Turkish-led, I guess, coalition, or is it Russian-led? Who comes in to plug that hole if we see US troops out of the region?
Well, the challenge is who comes into Iraq. So, well, Syria is already sort of an open space where the Russians are operating and where we see the Turks active. Iraq is a very different type of location. It's not clear that the Iraqis really want another large power coming in. It's not even clear that the Iraqis want the Iranians to be a dominant power in Iraq. So they're going to be caught in a very difficult space. We certainly don't see the Chinese taking action. The Russians may offer a little bit of assistance, but it's not clear that the Russians really want to get themselves pulled further into crisis areas within the Middle East, in places where they have to be much more active with their military forces.
How quickly does this move from here? We, of course, know that there are threats coming from Iran. The United States is calling what it says is a perhaps disproportionate response if there is retaliation. Is that enough of a deterrent to keep Iran at bay, or do you see this escalating in the coming week?
The U.S. has made it clear that it's tried to carry out an action to escalate in order to de-escalate. But the reality is that it's very difficult for the Iranians not to respond They don't have to respond tomorrow. They don't have to respond next week, but they certainly do feel that they need to make a very strong response to demonstrate that they're not a country that can just be pushed over. And this is that delicate balance that we've been seeing for a while. Each side has been testing how far they can go. What's the limit of the other side? The United States has tried to act and say, okay, we do have limits. We're no longer going to be sitting back. But from the Iranian perspective, they can't show that they're weak at this moment.
Rodger, just finally, we've also seen the Iranians essentially martyr Soleimani now. How significant is this creation of a cult of personality moving forward? And is this going to really underpin what happens in the region over the next decade, as some have suggested?
Well, certainly in Iran, this has some pretty tremendous impact. Soleimani was a bit of a contentious figure in Iran. He wasn't entirely popular with everybody, but now that he's been, quote, martyred, it is starting to pull people together around him. It's going to give the so-called hardliners a bit of an advantage as they go into elections I think, in February and later this year. So that does strengthen that aspect of Iran and the Iranian regime and the Iranian government. And I think that we have solidified this concept of Iran reasserting itself within the region, trying to take this stronger role. So it is going to have a very significant lingering effect, particularly if we do see a steady drawdown of the U.S. direct action within the region.